Today, we become legends.
Recently in Smite's mid-season update, Diminishing Returns was changed in the way it works, and it was made a visible mechanic to all players. Prior to this patch, DR still existed, but you couldn't see its effect on you in-game directly. This never made any sense to me personally, given how much DR was impacting your games, without a lot of more casual players even knowing it existed. A quick refresher on how Diminishing Returns works, you can skip this section if you already know. When hit by a hard CC, you gain a stack of DR, which reduces the duration of further hard CCs by a percentage. These stacks last 15 seconds and refresh in duration on being hit by further hard CCs. Soft CCs neither apply DR nor are affected by it. The way it used to work was that you got 2 stacks of DR maximum that did 40% reduction each, so after 2 hard CCs hit you, any follow-up CCs will be 80% shorter. But never less than 0.4 seconds, as this was the hard limit for how much they can be reduced to, and still is. After mid-season, each hard CC still applies 1 stack of DR, but the max stack count is now 4, and each stack applies 20% reduction instead of 40. So still a max of 80%, but most hard CCs will now apply less reduction than before. Only 20% versus 40%. I say most hard CCs because there is now a new category called true hard CCs that includes most displacement based or animation based CCs. This includes banishes, grabs, knockups and knockbacks, polymorphs and pulls. All these CCs aren't reduced by DR, this has always been the case, no changes here, however they now apply 2 stacks of DR to the target instead of 1 for all other hard CCs. So effectively, these 6 CCs function the same way they used to in terms of after being hit by one of them you get a 40% CC reduction and after 2 you get 80%, whereas any normal hard CC is now 20% per hit, half as effective as before, which of course is a drawback to you being hit by these CCs as they will last longer on you in follow-ups, and a benefit to you if you're using these CCs to chain the enemy. A few smaller changes were made, such as Roots now being hard CCs and applying 1 stack of DR, while Intoxicates and Trembles are now soft CCs and apply no DR nor are affected by it. And finally, abilities that can apply multiple different CCs will now apply DR stacks for each. It's not listed on if this was the case before, but I don't think it was, so as far as I know this is a new mechanic. This can make certain abilities DR super hard and make follow-up CCs extremely weak in comparison. These 5 CC abilities were adjusted on patch day to compensate for this, but this definitely wasn't all the gods who have double CCs on abilities, so I think we will be seeing some follow-up changes here. So, there are a few broad groups of gods that will benefit or be hurt by these changes. First up, a lot of gods will benefit from this change. So long as the god in question has only normal hard CCs in their kit and has no true hard CCs, they will benefit. This is because each stack of DR now only reduces 20% instead of 40%, so gods with only 1 hard CC, which is a surprising amount actually, will benefit very slightly since their CC won't DR future CCs from teammates as hard and vice versa. But the major benefit has come in the form of gods with 2 or more hard CCs, especially ones that follow up off of each other, but have no true hard CCs in their kit. Thor is a great example of this kind of buff since he stuns from his ult into another stun from his wall as a direct follow-up. This wall stun after ulting is now 20% longer than before because of these changes. A handful of gods that use Intoxicates and Trembles were also buffed in this patch, most notably Bacchus, who often used his ult after his major CCs, which used to DR it heavily, often by 80%. Making the Intoxicate actually pretty useless. It's now a soft CC and so won't be affected by DR and will be the full 6 second duration always instead of the 1.2 seconds that it usually was if you used it after both of your hard CCs. Cabrakan is also helped a fair bit by this change, as not only will his 3 not DR his 2 anymore if you are using them in that way, his 3's Tremble effect will also be always full duration now, whereas before you would often engage with his 1 and 2 which would DR the ticks of the Tremble quite a lot. This just makes it even harder to control your character in Cabrakan's 3 as you're CC'd more. Another small but very significant group of gods affected by these changes are the root users, this time being nerfed by the new patch. To refresh, roots are now hard CCs, apply 1 stack of DR, and are reduced by DR when they weren't previously. This affects quite a few gods, like Terra for example, who usually engages with her big AoE root and then follows up into her wall stun. This wall stun will now be DR'd by 20% when before this patch it would be full duration, since roots weren't considered hard CC before this. This works the other way too, if she stuns first and then roots, the root is DR'd by 20%. Kumba is another good example of this. If you're trying to root from range and follow up into Mighty Yawn, it's going to DR 20% and vice versa. Though notably, Kumba's ult will not DR, since both the banish and the follow-up knockup are true hard CCs. However, any follow-up CCs after Kumba's ult will be heavily DR'd. Jing Chen is another good example here, but we'll talk about him more in another section because he's affected by two different rules here. Next up, we have another group that are made weaker by this patch, and this is of course any gods with both normal hard CCs and the newly formed true hard CCs in their kit. This includes knockups and knockbacks, banishes, grabs, pulls, and polymorphs. These CCs are always full duration and are not affected by DR stacks, which is a more indirect way they got nerfed in this patch. With less DR going around, the CCs that are immune to DR get a bit weaker in comparison to normal hard CCs. But since hard CCs now only apply one 20% stack of DR, and true hard CCs now apply 2 stacks of it for a total of 40%, they've been nerfed in that regard as well. Don't get me wrong, they needed this nerf to balance out the fact that they're immune to DR, which is really strong, but it does hurt certain gods like Rat, who usually engage with their knockups or other true hard CCs. To be clear, these gods technically are the same as before, but every other god that doesn't use true hard CCs in this way got stronger, since all hard CCs used to apply one stack of 40%. These true hard CCs still apply 40%, so kind of work in the same way, but normal hard CCs now only apply 20%, and so are comparatively stronger. A way you can get around this indirect nerf with these types of gods is by using your normal hard CCs first, and then your true hard CCs as a follow-up, since they won't DR. This has always been the optimal way to use your CCs, which is fine on some gods that flow naturally into using their true hard CC last, but many gods flow more naturally when using their true hard CC first, and that's a pretty significant nerf to those types of gods. There are also certain gods that have what high-res call code-driven CCs, for example Hercules with his 2. Previously, these CCs weren't applying DR, but now they should be, which results in a pretty huge nerf for specific gods that use these CCs followed up into regular hard CCs. In Herc's example, his 2 into 1 is now DR'd 40% on the stun at the end, when previously it wouldn't be DR'd at all. Well, that's supposed to be the case anyway. I tested Herc in game and it seems he's still not applying DR with his 2, so there's a few things to iron out here for sure that are really beyond my own capability to explore. I'm sure with the extra backend data and tools they can fix a lot of these issues in future patches, but right now it's a little janky. Next up, we have gods that are affected by the rule that abilities can apply multiple DR stacks if they apply multiple CCs, and therefore can DR themselves by applying one CC into another. For example, Anher's Impale, which knocks back into a stun, Ares ult, who pulls into a stun, etc. 5 of these were listed on the patch notes, and the rule used here is that they apply one CC, then the other, not 2 CCs at the same time. So for example, Hercules 1 wasn't changed here because the knockback and the stun apply in the same instance, not sequentially, and so the knockback won't DR the stun because they apply at the same time. However, you will now apply 3 20% DR stacks after driving striking an enemy, when previously you only applied one 40% stack because the push was a code-driven CC that wasn't applying DR beforehand. These 5 gods that were listed on the patch notes definitely aren't the only gods affected by this change. Jing Chen is another big one that is hit by both the root hard CC change and this change of abilities being able to DR themselves with sequential CCs. After Jing Chen's knockup on the 2, the enemy gets 2 DR stacks, which reduces the length of the root by 40%, when previously it was always full duration because roots were soft CCs. They did say they'd be keeping an eye on things and making changes in the coming patches to the gods that need it. Another interesting one is Fafnir's Dragon Form 3. This ability stuns for 2 seconds and disarms for 2 seconds, which really makes no sense since you can't basic attack while stunned anyway. The disarm is kind of redundant. But it does, however, mean that the ability applies 2 stacks of DR and functions effectively like a true hard CC, but without the benefits of a true hard CC in terms of being immune to DR. These effects don't apply sequentially, they apply simultaneously just like Herc 1, and so they won't DR each other, but they will DR future CCs on that target, for example by Fafnir's Dragon Form 1 follow-up, DRing by 40% instead of 20% for literally no benefit. I suppose this is technically the same as before, since prior to this patch only one DR stack was applied, but it was 40%, whereas now it applies 2 DR stacks because of the new rule, but they're only 20%. So it's kind of the same thing, but it just seems like a strange interaction that I thought I'd mention. I don't really know why this disarms as well as a stun. Morgan Le Fay falls into a similar vein, as her 2 does a knock-up into a knock-back, which are sequential, and so this applies max DR stacks to the enemy in one ability, which is a really tough pill to swallow, and if you follow up with her Fear after her 2, it will be only 0.4 seconds. So make sure to try and Fear first and knock back second on Morgan after this update. There are others that were affected by this major change that abilities can now apply multiple DR stacks for each CC type they apply, and it stealth nerfed many gods such as the ones I've listed here. To be honest, this change doesn't make much sense to me as it causes a lot of confusion, inadvertent nerfs, and doesn't really achieve anything. In my opinion, abilities should simply apply DR stacks of the highest value CC they apply. So if they have a true hard CC in combination with a regular hard CC, they should just apply 2 stacks. But if they only have regular hard CCs, it should apply 1 stack regardless of how many total CCs the ability has. This approach does have its own issues, like certain abilities being buffed by this change, but I think it's a better approach than what is currently implemented, and to be completely honest, DR could use a nerf if anything. I know it's heresy to say CC should get buffed in Smite, which is effectively what nerfing DR does, but I think there are better ways to approach nerfing CC than just saying, lol, your Ymir freeze actually lasts 0.4 seconds. It isn't communicated very well to players even after the changes where you can see it, before it was just a shit show, and it feels terrible to be the guy who hits his huge CC that lasts for 0.4 seconds just because Morgan Le Fay used her 2 on the target 10 seconds earlier. I would much rather see beads reduced in cooldown and maybe even a couple of other ways to cleanse CC than have DR reduced by 80%, it just seems a little ridiculous to me. It's not something that any player has control over, neither the user of the CC nor the receiver, and it just feels bad all around in my opinion. At least with CCR you have control over when you buy it versus don't buy it and suffer the consequences of that. When I get saved or denied a kill by DR, it doesn't really feel like I did anything to deserve it. I'm not saying the system should be removed, but I don't think it should be as strong as it is right now. But anyway, sorry if this video was a bit all over the place, but that's kind of how these DR changes are. They did their best of explaining it on the patch notes, but a lot of stuff was left out or overlooked, and from my own testing, some of what they said they've implemented hasn't even been implemented. Like Herc 2 applying DR after the update, in my testing it still doesn't, but I imagine these things will get ironed out in coming patches. But yeah, that's all I've got. Hopefully this video provided some insight into the fairly hidden mechanic and who's got this fairly hidden mechanic and who's got stronger or weaker from these changes. I'll catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.